a plan to subpoena judges to testify before Congress about controversial decisions that they make. In certain cases, you advocate impeaching judges or abolishing courts altogether. Two conservative former attorneys general have criticized your plan, saying it alters the checks and balances of the three branches of government. Now, they used words like dangerous, outrageous, and totally irresponsible. Are they wrong?
Well, the first half is right. It alters the balance because the courts have become grotesquely dictatorial, far too powerful, and I think, frankly, arrogant in their misreading of the American people. There's an entire paper at Newt.org. I've been working on this project since 2002, when the Ninth Circuit Court said that one nation under God is unconstitutional in the Pledge of Allegiance, and I decided if you had judges who were so radically anti-American that they thought one nation under God was wrong, they shouldn't be on the court. Now, we have... I taught a short course in this at the University of Georgia Law School. I testified in front of sitting Supreme Court justices at Georgetown Law School, and I warned them, you keep attacking the core base of American exceptionalism, and you are going to find an uprising against you which will rebalance the judiciary. We have a balance of three branches. We do not have a judicial dictatorship in this country, and that's what the Federalist Papers promised us. And I would, just like Jefferson, Jackson, Lincoln, and FDR, I would be prepared to take on the judiciary if, in fact, it did not restrict itself in what it was doing.
What of the former attorneys general? These are conservative former attorneys generals who have criticized the plan, as I say, dangerous, ridiculous, outrageous, yes, totally irresponsible.
Sure. I'd ask, first of all, have they studied Jefferson, who in 1802 abolished 18 out of 35 federal judges? 18 out of 35 were abolished.
Something that was highly criticized.
Not by anybody in power in 1802. Jefferson himself was asked, is the Supreme Court supreme? And he said, that is absurd. That would be an oligarchy. Lincoln repudiates the Judge Scott decision in his first inaugural address in 1861 and says, no 9 people can make law in this country. That would be the end of our freedom. So I would suggest to you, actually, as a historian, I may understand this better than lawyers. And as lawyers, those two attorneys general are behaving exactly like law schools, which have overly empowered lawyers to think that they can dictate to the rest of us.
Congresswoman Bachmann, you heard Speaker Gingrich reference the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. That is one of the courts that he has suggested abolishing. It is a left-leaning court, and as he points out, and as he has done before, he believes it's an activist court because, in part, it was the court that issued a ruling striking down under God in the pledge years ago, a decision that was reversed by the Supreme Court later. Do you agree that the Ninth Circuit should be abolished? And if so, what would then happen if a Democratic president came into office and we had a democratically controlled Congress that later took aim at the right-leaning federal courts? Where would it end?
Well, where it needs to end is under the Constitution of the United States. That's the real issue. Are the courts following the Constitution, or aren't they following the Constitution? It isn't just Congress that gets it wrong. It's the courts that get it wrong as well.
But what do you do about it?
Well, what we need to do about it is have both the President and the United States Congress take their authority back. And I would agree with Newt Gingrich that I think that the Congress and the President of the United States have failed to take their authority, because now we've gotten to the point where we think the final arbiter of law is the court system. It isn't. The intention of the founders was that the courts would be the least powerful system of government. And if we give to the courts the right to make law, then the people will have lost their representation. They need to hold on to their representation. That's why I commend Iowans, because they chose not to retain 3 judges that decided that marriage would be in their likeness. And Iowans decided to take their Constitution back. That's what the American people need to do, take the Constitution back. And as President of the United States, I would only appoint judges to the Supreme Court who believe in the original intent of the Constitution.
Congressman Paul, let me ask you, do you believe in what the two candidates have said, that it would potentially be okay to abolish courts like the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals entirely, or judges impeach them, if Congress and the President don't decide they don't like their rulings?
Well, the Congress can get rid of these courts if a judge misbehaves and is unethical and gets into trouble, the proper procedure is impeachment. But to subpoena judges before the Congress, I'd really question that. And if you get too careless about abolishing courts, that could open up a can of worms, because there could be retaliation. So it should be a more serious. Yes, we get very frustrated with this, but the whole thing is, if you just say, well, we're going to, okay, there are 10 courts, let's get rid of 3 this year because they ruled a way we didn't like. That to me is, I think, opening up a can of worms for us and would lead to trouble. But I really, really question this idea that the Congress could subpoena judges and bring them before us. That's a real affront to the separation of the powers.
Governor Romney, many people believe that the way to rein in so-called activist judges is to be careful in appointing or nominating the judges in the first place. As governor of Massachusetts, you passed over Republicans for 3/4 of the judicial vacancies you faced, instead nominating Democrats or independents. With that track record, why should Republicans believe that you will appoint conservatives to the bench if you become president?
Well, I have to let you know that in Massachusetts, I actually don't get to appoint the judges. I get to nominate them. They go before something known as the Governor's Council. It consists of, I believe, 7 members, all of whom are elected Democrats. And so to be able to get my appointments through, I had to have people of both parties. And the people I put forward all were individuals who I vetted very carefully to make sure they would follow the rule of law. These are largely people going into criminal courts. I chose overwhelmingly people who had been prosecutors in their prior experience. And so we had that kind of justice. Now, let me note that the key thing I think the president's going to do is going to be, with the longest legacy, is going to be appointing Supreme Court and justices throughout the judicial system. As many as half of the justices in the next 4 years are going to be appointed by the next president. This is a critical time to choose someone who believes in conservative principles. Now, I don't believe that it makes a lot of sense to have Congress overseeing justices. The only group that has less credibility than justices, perhaps, is Congress. So let's not have them be in charge of overseeing the justices. However, we don't call it, we the judges. We call it we the people. And we do have the ability to remove justices that need to be impeached. We also have the ability to pass new amendments if we think a justice has taken the nation in the wrong direction. And where a statute has been misinterpreted, Congress can write a statute that clarifies that point. We have the ability to rein in excessive justice.
And I just want to go quickly down the line with just a name. Favorite Supreme Court justice? Senator Santorum? Current.
I have to say, these folks over here have been talking about taking on the courts. I've done it. I actually campaigned in Iowa against those justices, and I was the only one on this panel that did it, number one. Number two, when the partial birth abortion statute was struck down by the Supreme Court, George Bush got elected. We actually went back, and I worked with Henry Hyde, and we passed another bill, told the Supreme Court they were wrong, passed it, George Bush signed it, and it was overturned. You can talk about reform and doing something to confront the courts, or you can actually go out and make it happen. I made it happen. And it's Thomas.
And quickly down the line.
Yeah.
Favorite current Supreme Court justice?
I'll try to be as quickly as I can, but when I talk about overhauling Washington, D.C., one of the things I talk about, besides a part-time Congress, is no longer having lifetime terms for the federal bench. I think that is one of the ways that you keep these unaccountable legislators with robes from trying to dictate to the rest of us. And I would say, you pick Alito, Roberts, or Thomas, pick one.
All right. Would you pick one, please?
Yes, Roberts, Thomas, Alito, and Scalia.
All right. Speaker Gingrich?
I think that's a pretty darn good list, and I would sign up for those guys. Scalia is probably the most intellectual of the 4. They're all 4 terrific judges. I mean, if we had 9 judges as good as those 4, we would be very happy with the Supreme Court.
Congressman Paul?
From my viewpoint, they're all good and they're all bad, because our country a long time ago split freedom up into 2 pieces: personal liberty and economic liberty. And the judges, as is the Congress, as the nation, think it's 2 issues. It's about 1 issue, so therefore Congress is split on this issue as well as our judges.
Last chance to say your name.
No, I'm not going to put it. All of them are good and all of them are bad.
Congresswoman Bachmann.
Well, I do think that there are good justices, and I would put Antonin Scalia at the top of the list. I would also include Clarence Thomas and John Roberts and Alito. I think they're all marvelous. It'd be very easy to pick any one of them.
Governor Huntsman?
One of the reasons I'm so optimistic about the future of this country is because we have rule of law. Let's face it.
one of the great things that this country has that very few other countries have. So the judiciary is critically important. It's also important to note that governors actually have some experience in appointing judges. You got to make those hard decisions. And as I reflect on those who today serve, I've got to say Justice Roberts and Justice Alito fit the bill very, very nicely.
Thank you all.
That was a valiant effort.
I tried.
Yeah.
I tried.
Coming up, there's a lot of ground to cover in this next hour. The threat from Iran and other foreign policy hotspots, up and down oil prices, immigration and border issues, and controversial social issues. Stay with us. Remember, tweet at Bret Baier with a question or a follow-up. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sioux City, Iowa, and the Republican presidential debate. Fired up crowd. They're ready for hour number 2. And we begin hour number 2 with an important topic, foreign policy. Congressman Paul, many Middle East experts now say Iran may be less than 1 year away from getting a nuclear weapon. Now, judging from your past statements, even if you had solid intelligence that Iran, in fact, was going to get a nuclear weapon, President Paul would remove the U.S. sanctions on Iran, included those added by the Obama administration. So, to be clear, GOP nominee Paul would be running left of President Obama on the issue of Iran.
But I'd be running with the American people because it would be a much better policy. But for you to say that there's some scientific evidence and some people arguing that maybe in a year they might have a weapon, there's a lot more saying they don't have it. There's no UN evidence of that happening. Klepper at the in our National Security Department, he says there is no evidence. It's no different than it was in 2003. You know what I really fear about what's happening here? It's another Iraq coming. There's war propaganda going on, and we're arguing. To me, the greatest danger is that we will have a president that will overreact, that we will soon bomb Iran, and the sentiment is very mixed. It's very mixed even in Israel. You know, the head of the security for Israel, who just recently retired, said that it wouldn't make any sense to do this, to take them out because they might be having a weapon. So I would say that the greatest danger is overreacting. There is no evidence that they have it, and it would make more sense if we lived through the Cold War, which we did, with 30,000 missiles pointed at us. We ought to really sit back and think and not jump the gun and believe that we are going to be attacked. That's how we got into that useless war in Iraq and lost so much in Iraq.
Congressman Paul, the question was based on the premise that you had solid intelligence. You actually had solid intelligence as President Paul. And yet you still at that point would pull back U.S. sanctions, and again, as a GOP nominee, would be running left of President Obama on this issue.
Yes, all we're doing is promoting their desire to have it. Ehud Barak, the defense minister for Israel, said that if he were in Iran, he would probably want a nuclear weapon too, because they're surrounded for geopolitical reasons. So that's an understanding. So the fact that they are surrounded, they have a desire. And how do we treat people when they have a nuclear weapon? With a lot more respect. What did we do with Libya? We talked to them, we talked them out of their nuclear weapon, and then we killed them. So it makes more sense to work with people. And the whole thing is that nuclear weapons are loaded over there. Pakistan and India, Israel has 300 of them. We have our ships there. We got to get it in a proper context. Right. We don't need another war.
Understood. And you make that point quite a lot. I'll try one more time. Iran is reportedly running exercises on closing the Straits of Hormuz, a key passage, as you know, for global trade. Now, what should the U.S. response be if Iran were to take that dramatic step?
Well, this is where the plans are on the book. All they talk about is when are we, the West, going to bomb Iran? So why wouldn't they talk about, they don't have a weapon, they don't have a nuclear weapon, why wouldn't they try to send out some information there and say, you know, if you come and bomb us, we might close the Straits of Hormuz down. So already the president, I think, is wisely backing off on the sanctions, because it's going to be an economic calamity if you take all the oil out of Europe. So I think that makes sense. He knows these sanctions are overreaching. Sanctions are an act of war when you prevent goods and services from going into a country. We need to approach this a little differently. We have 12,000